Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dough Doctor. I'm Chef Colette, and I'm your answer guru. Those of you who know me know that I have answered thousands of questions over the years as an instructor for Craftsy.com, and then also for oh my God, just Instagram, and many of you have found me all different places. My website, bakingwithcolette.com. I'm so happy you're joining me. This is our first episode of a show that's going to work like this. The way it's going to work is that I'm going to go live 12 noon Pacific time every Saturday because a lot of us bake on Saturday, I would guess, and you collect questions. You have questions as you're baking. And what I want to avoid is this. I want to avoid you having to dig into the internet and try to find answers. Just come here to the Dough Doctor, and I will answer your baking questions. If I don't know the answer, then I'll find it and I'll get back to you. So we have a few seed questions to start. So let's just start with our opening questions. And please put it in the chat where you are watching from. And if you have questions, then go ahead and add them to the chat function. You should be able to see that and access that. That would be great. I would love to see some action in the chat. I am working with some new technology. I'm on a new platform, and I'm learning. So I really hope that you can access, the show. All right, so first question, one of our bakers asked, self-rising flour. She said that she recently made a French apple tart and used all-purpose flour for the crust. She asked, what would happen if she used self-rising flour? So let me explain a little bit about self-rising flour. In different parts of the United States, especially the South, and then in the United Kingdom, self-rising flour is popular. It's all-purpose flour, usually bleached, that has a little baking powder and sometimes salt added to it. So what would it do to a tart crust? Very little. There are some famous bakers that actually like to add a little baking powder to their pie and tart crusts to sort of add with, especially if they're looking for a little lift or a little bit of layering. Now, it's not very much, and just so the answer in a nutshell is you can absolutely use self-rising flour for a tart crust with really no problem at all. So if that's what you have, use it. Please don't feel that you need to go out and buy a different flour, or if you happen to, find a bag of had bought it by accident, whatever, you have it from making biscuits or scones, then for something like that, go ahead and use it. We're not getting any activity in the chat, so I am a little concerned. I'm going to just pause for a second and put our, we're just going to pause for 1 second. And I'll put the questions up while you are just, unfortunately, I don't have commercials. I would have to make them, so just give me a moment here. right, we are back, and let's see if oh, David, yay, awesome. I am getting some people dropping in, so that's great. Thank you so much for your patience. This first show maybe have a few technical difficulties, but I will have them ironed out. All right, so let's answer our second question that was seeded in. And if you have questions, start putting them in the chat. All right, the show's going to go for only about 25 minutes, like a regular show, but we'll still get to a lot of questions, I promise you. All right, question number 2 came from another baker, and he asked, when decorating a cake in the torting, and when we tort a cake, we're referring to cutting it, cutting our layers, and then stacking and building our cake. Is it best to use a frozen, a refrigerated, or a room temperature cake? Well, let's work from the back. A room temperature cake is the most fragile, all right? So it's sort of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. A refrigerated cake, I feel, in my experience, is the easiest to handle. The crumb structure of the cake is chilled, so when we go to cut our layers, whether we're using a long serrated knife or we're using a cake leveler, which is basically a piece of piano wire on a frame, it is much better if the cake is chilled. Now, when it's frozen, there are challenges. One thing that I have seen is it's a little bit more challenging to control the knife, and it's a little bit more dangerous. So we're going to go with door number 2, which is refrigerated. It is best, in my opinion, as the dough doctor, that you bake your cake. Cakes are full of sugar, so they are the one finished baked good that refrigerate really well because they grab the humidity from the refrigerator, and the sugar holds that moisture in. So let's say you freeze your cake layers because they freeze really well. Then the recommendation is to thaw them overnight in the refrigerator, and then next day pull them out and start layering, torting, and decorating your cake. And then, of course, enjoy it because cake's pretty awesome. All right, any further questions about that? All right, great. Now we had a question about sourdough. And this question was about hydration levels in sourdough. We had a big sourdough boom. I almost said doom. That was a little Freudian slip. We had a sourdough boom in 2020 when we were all on lockdown. It was like everyone's dreams of, instead of dreaming of sugar plums, they dreamt of sourdough. And many people learned that sourdough is pretty tricky. On average, our sourdough breads have a higher water content than, let's say a milk bread or whole wheat bread or a sandwich loaf or dinner rolls. Sourdough bread is usually up there 68 to 70% hydration. And one thing we love in our sourdoughs across the board is to have nice big air pockets. And the term for those air pockets in professional bread world is alveoli. And they only happen if we have a higher level of hydration. Okay, so why is that beneficial in our sourdough? We are working with our carefully cultivated natural yeast. And so in order to grab nutrition from the starches in the flour and to grab moisture, The yeast has to be able to move around freely. Now, natural yeast is a lot more fragile than commercial yeast. So if the dough does not have a higher hydration level, then it can't move around freely, making bulk fermentation and proofing, they take longer. Commercial yeast is a lot sturdier, so it can be in a dough that's not as hydrated. So that's the difference there. Now, our sourdoughs are not that easy to handle because of that higher hydration. And so that brings me to a question that came up on Instagram that I did not put in our opening questions because I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen with the chat. If the chat was going to blow up with questions in real time, then I wasn't quite sure how to balance things. But we have another bread question, and please put it in the chat if you are interested in bread chat questions. What kind of questions do you like to hear the answer to? Please let me know. All right, so I'm just going to piggyback onto the sourdough question because a question came in from one of our bakers that asked, some bread recipes call for stretching and folding, and other bread recipes don't. What's the difference, and why do we stretch and fold some and then not others? Okay, number one, we stretch and fold doughs that are a higher level of hydration. We usually give doughs that are higher hydrated, and I'm talking like above 68% hydration. Again, hydration is water level or liquid level because we know bread can be made with milk, it can be made with beer, it can be made with wine, it can be made with water, it can be made with cider. I could go on and on, I promise. So what's happening, sorry about that, I didn't realize that I hadn't transitioned myself to on camera, but I am here now. So more hydration means we stretch and fold because that's the way we develop gluten. And with doughs that are at a lower level of hydration, we don't have to do that. We mix them in the mixer. Sometimes they get a longer mix, and we're able to bulk ferment them in a bowl, very, very traditional way of bread making. So it's all about that hydration and mix. Short mix, which is just putting the dough together until it's a cohesive mass, and the particles, the flour particles are hydrated, and then stop no longer than 3 minutes. Then we cover it, we let it rest, and usually after 30 or 40 minutes, we begin to stretch and fold. We stretch from the top, we fold over, we stretch from the bottom, we fold over. We can see all that gluten formation. It's super cool, side to side. And then we cover it and we let it sit again. So that is that question. All right. So now I'm going to pull another one. I don't have any in the chat. So again, this is our first live stream. I'm so grateful you're here. And I have a question about croissants. And then I have one final cake question. And if there's nothing else in the chat, we'll probably wrap up after that. So please, please, if you have a baking question, put it in the chat. All right, so here we go. Why can croissants sometimes be tough? Couple of reasons. Number one, when we mix our croissant dough, we want to really keep it light and pillowy, and which means it's a short mix. It's no more than 3 minutes just to bring the dough together. And then we let it rest, preferably in the refrigerator overnight, so the flour particles have fully hydrated and the gluten is nice and relaxed, at least for several hours. And if the dough gets overmixed at all, then what happens, the gluten gets more developed, and we continue to develop gluten during the rolling and turning process. So that's it. So we have to watch our mixing. And then also, we want to keep a light touch when we're rolling out. If you've ever seen my craftsy.com class, Classic Croissants Modern Techniques, I actually will gently tap the dough to a 1/2 inch before I start rolling. Not so strong as to break up the butter layers, God forbid, but enough just to get it 1/2 inch and then start rolling. Because as we roll, we activate gluten, and in activating that gluten, we run the risk, if we activate it too soon, of ending up with a tough dough. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I'm checking the chat here. And then I have a question about, one more question. Let's see. We'll go to Instagram right here. So we covered that. And then one more question for today. In making a pastry cream, let's say for a Boston cream pie, how do we make sure that our cream, or a filling for a cupcake, or in a cream pie, eclair, any place where we would use pastry cream, what do we do to make sure the cream has enough structure? Number one, we want to use a formula that has the proper amount of cornstarch in it. We want to make sure that the mixture has come up to a good boil after the starch has been added. So we have to cook it long enough, but not too long, because you might not know this, but one thing about cornstarch, if it boils for longer than 3 minutes, the starch molecules will break, and then our filling will be liquidy. Also, to make sure it's good and cold. Another thing we can do is slightly increase the amount of butter that is mixed into the pastry cream. That will help solidify it, and also when the butter goes in. I've seen very thick pastry creams when the butter goes in, when it's softened at the end. It really creates something called an emulsification, which really gives our pastry cream nice body. Any further questions? In the chat, I'm not seeing anything right now, but I cannot thank you enough, David and HDJ, for joining us, and anyone else who's not in the chat who is watching this live stream, please come back next week. That'll be 12 noon Pacific time on this channel, the Ask the Dough Doctor, and thank you so much. Collect those baking questions, and instead of diving into the rabbit hole that's the internet, come back and ask me live. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy your baking.